Hi, my name is Albert Hernriquez, and I'm a senior at Florida International University. I'm a psychology major. I want to apply to grad school for counseling, and I would like to become a therapist for. I'd like to specialize as a therapist in LGBT therapy and help people who experience sexual and gender dysphoria. The article that I chose to review for this assignment was She Was Just Walking Home. The article chronicles the murder of a 33-year-old British marketing executive, Sarah Everard. She was murdered by a law enforcement officer, Wayne Couzens, in London, in the UK. It seems that, according to the article, there's been a theme of police brutality towards women for numerous years now. From 2012 to 2018, 562 officers in the Metropolitan Police Department were accused of sexual assault. Only 43 were convicted of or faced any repercussions. Sarah's murder stirred the pot in the UK, so much so that the law enforcement had to respond to the murder. 20,000 undercover cops were implemented in bars and public spaces such as clubs as well in London, and citizens were not really happy about this, mostly because the murder was committed by a law enforcement officer, someone who is supposed to safeguard our well-being and ensure the safety of their citizens. So adding more police to the mix wasn't exactly the answer that people were looking for. I think that a more appropriate thing for law enforcement to have done was maybe create more rigorous screenings for who they're actually hiring, or sensitivity trainings to make sure that, yes, people don't murder, but also that law enforcement officers are aware of the wide range of demographics that they serve. The murder was defined as a product of patriarchal violence in the article. This specific phrase stood out to me, and I decided to look for concepts throughout the text that were most relevant to patriarchal violence. Patriarchal violence can be defined as the looming threat by which women are controlled and constrained. And I think that that's something that is evident in women's experiences in the way that they are so protective of themselves. And one person that Miss Sarah probably would not have really anticipated her having to shield herself from is law enforcement, who, like I said earlier, is really supposed to be there to safeguard the lives of their citizens. And yet she was murdered by a police officer. The relevant course concepts that I chose to pull from were from Chapter 6, Women's Bodies, Chapter 7, Sexuality and Sexualization, and Chapter 12, Gender-Based Violence. I chose to cover objectification because I covered it in my paper, The Secret Lives of Sugar Babies and Sugar Daddies. According to the text, that objectification of women occurs because as long as women focus on their bodies, they would have less economic power and less time to focus on changing sexism in society. I think that part of the reason that the objectification of women occurs is because mainstream media and brands push an unrealistic and unattainable beauty standard that women try to pursue. And I think that part of the reason that this can be so dangerous is because it enables small microaggressions to ensue throughout society. But I think that it also enables grander instances like the murder of Sarah Everard by Officer Couzens. Sexualization and objectification are two different things, but they are very similar. According to the text, sexualization occurs when sexuality is imposed on others, when people are regarded as such sex objects, and or when their value is reduced to their sexual appeal or sexual behavior. Part of the reason that I wanted to include sexualization and the objectification of women so heavily into my oral presentation was because I feel that because society and the patriarchy has gone ahead and objectified women to the degree that we have, I think that men fail to see women as human entities as opposed to seeing them as men see, excuse me, I'd like to rephrase that. Men see women as subordinate objects of their lived experiences as opposed to individual entities, which women are, and as we all are. The article mentioned a trans woman by the name of Naomi Hersey, a trans woman who died in a police sex raid. And this kind of stood out to me because it does go hand in hand with the objectification and sexualization of women, which is a patriarchal script and narrative that the mainstream woman often kind of identifies with and goes along with. Part of the paper that I wrote had a lot to do with sex work and the lived experiences of sex workers. Sex work is an umbrella term that refers to the exchange of sexual services, performances, and products for compensation. This can include in-person sexual interactions such as oral sex or sexual intercourse, often referred to as prostitution. It can also include pornography, stripping, and webcam models. One of the things the reason that Miss Naomi Hersey stood out to me the most is because as a sex worker, I feel like her lived experience was not on was not as much of a priority as the individual who lived maybe a more mainstream, morally correct life. And this is a general a specific issue that I wanted to bring into the general topic, because as I said at the beginning, we don't need more police in order to intervene on the behalf of individuals like Sarah. What we need is to fully rewrite the system so that instances like this don't occur, and people of different lived experiences can have the dignity and the rights that like they deserve, like handed out to them. This instance, Sarah's death is obviously an instance of gender-based violence, not only because she's a woman, but she lived an experience that so many of us fear, being murdered because we are a minority group, or because we are seen as more frail or small or meek, or because certain institutions are ingrained, such as patriarchy, which allow for minority groups to be taken advantage of. I'm sorry, I had kind of like a brain fart and I had to really get it back together. Although, we have the privilege of being able to give an oral presentation and record it before, and this is now like my 15th take, I think that interacting with the class would have made this a lot easier now that I think about it. But anyway, back to the oral presentation. Gender-based violence occurs at both individual and structural levels. Gender-based violence can be seen in cases of domestic abuse as well as instances of microaggression of women facing public. Examples of structural violence can be seen in instances of sexism, racism, prejudice against religious peoples. Part of the reason that I chose to highlight gender-based violence is because of the impact that Sarah's death had on the public. There was a real sense of fraternity, or rather sorority. After Sarah's death, women came and paid respects to her at a park nearby, and there was a vigil held. As I said earlier, 20,000 cops were recruited in order to improve the state of the institution. However, people were not very happy with that. And I think that her death, it was an appropriate time for this conversation to be had, because people are having enough of it. And I think that so often there's a lot of kickback because an institution like law enforcement could have a lot of support and could have a lot of empathy. And I think that although it is an admirable position and an admirable job, I think that there always must be an opportunity for conversation in instances where improvements must be made, very similar to a child-parent conversation, or an employee and an employer, or a student and a professor. One of the I'm sorry, I had a call and it clicked me out, but we're back. Another component of chapter 12 that I chose to review was rape. A rape myth is specifically, I wanted to speak about rape myths. A rape myth is a false belief about how rape occurs. Rape myths perpetuate rape culture by inaccurately depicting reality, which then creates doubt and self-blame among survivors. I think that the reason that I wanted to incorporate rape myths into my oral presentation was because at the beginning I did mention that 563, I believe, officers were charged with instances of rape among civilians. And regular rape is already a hard enough topic to talk about. It's already something that's so rampant throughout all entities and institutions throughout society. And similar to Sarah's death by Officer Cousins, I think that it's pretty egregious that it keeps on happening and happening and happening in these institutions. And there haven't been ways to improve these instances. Future considerations for the general issue, not just Sarah's death, would be police reformation, female empowerment, and the amplification of the women's liberation movement. Women already have a voice, and it just needs to be further, these voices just need to be further amplified, which is why I usually take a back seat in these instances. But because I had to give an oral presentation, there's been an opportunity for me to speak on behalf. However, I will always do my best as an ally, and I will always take a seat and allow other voices to be amplified so that I can learn and refine my points, so that when it is my opportunity to go out into the world and share these experiences, I can be the best and as well informed as I possibly can, and make the impact of the change that I want to see in the world. So that concludes my presentation. I hope I did well. I don't think I've had to give too many presentations before, but I really did enjoy the entirety of this class, and I hope I didn't do too poorly. I hope you have a nice day and take care.